Today we're going to take a look at the proxy workflow in Resolve 16. I've got the beta 6 release, so we're very close to the final release of Resolve 16. I've got Resolve Studio running on this machine. Now for the last several versions of Resolve, I've done tutorials showing the proxy workflow with Multicam, and we're going to take a look at that today. It's slightly different than it was in version 14 and 15. Pretty close, but I think it's worth revisiting it. So I'm just going to go ahead and launch Resolve. And I'll create a new project just by double-clicking on Untitled. Now, one of the first things I want to do here is set this up a bit. I've created a preset for Resolve 16, which I'll load. We'll just take a look at the master settings. One of the things that I set up here was simply that I wanted to use DNX HR low bandwidth for my render cache and optimized media. But for this project, I'm going to switch over to Ultra HD resolution. And my media is at 2997. I'll just save those changes. I'm going to switch over to the media page. Just some housekeeping. I want to create a few bins to help with managing the media here. So I'm going to create a bin called Source. This is where my source clips will be. And then just right-clicking on Master again, I'll add a bin called Proxy. One called Audio, and one called Program. You don't have to do this. Certainly you need your source and proxy bins for this workflow, but in terms of whether or not you use these specific names, that's totally up to you. Okay, so we'll look on my data folder here, my data drive. I have a source folder. And these, if I just take a look at the metadata here, these are all DNxHR 444 12-bit. And they're pretty sizable files. And what I've done is I've named these camera files for each camera. So the camera 1, there were actually 3 camera turns on and off 3 times throughout. So there are 3 camera 1 clips. There are 3 camera 2 clips. 2 camera 3 clips and 3 camera 4 clips. And I've just named them in a way to keep this straight. There's also a final mix of the audio, and this spans the entire program track, whereas the individual cameras turning on and off were just portions of that. The cameras recorded the same audio, so I'm going to be able to sync all these together using audio. We'll look at that in a moment. So I'm going to take all of these as my source clips and drag them into the source bin here. And eventually I'm going to move this audio into its own bin, but for now I'm going to keep them together with the source. Again, as a matter of housekeeping, I'm going to select all the camera 1 files and I'm going to assign them the metadata angle 1. We'll just save that. I'm going to take the 3 camera 2 files and set that up as angle 2. The 2 camera 3 files, set that up as angle 3. And the 3 camera 4 files as angle 4. And save. You can just see this as I step down through these. Angle 1, 2, 3, 4. And actually for the sound, I'm going to set this up. It's not really a camera angle, but it helps manage this media for now. I'll set this up as camera angle 5. Now, I'm going to want to do some multicam editing here, so I need to create a multicam clip. I'm going to do this by selecting all of these clips and then right-clicking and selecting the Create New Multicam Clip using Selected Clips option. I can leave the default name. It's picked the correct frame rate for these clips. For the sync angle, I want to sync by sound. And in terms of the angle name, I want to use the metadata angle. So when we switch between clips, we want to use that same clip angle. And this is a very important option here. I want to detect clips from the same camera using the angle metadata. So this tells Resolve to take, for example, the 3 camera 1 clips and associate them with the same camera angle track. Otherwise, if you didn't do this, you'd actually end up with 3 different tracks. Effectively, Resolve wouldn't know that these were intended to be the same camera angle. I'll just uncheck this Move Source Clips. I've already arranged the clips as I want. So now I'll create. Click Create here. It's analyzing the clips and arranging them based on the sound. I'll just move the multicam clip into the program bin, and I'm going to move the sound final mix into the audio bin now. We don't need it anymore. We've already created our multicam clip with it. Now the other thing I need to do for the proxy workflow is generate the proxies. And the way I do that within Resolve is to select the original source clips, and then under the file option for media management, I'll select the transcode option for the selected clips. And now I need to set a media destination. I'm going to use my main media drive here. And I've pre-made a proxy folder here, but I would select the proxy folder as the target. And then I select the media type. And in this case, I want to use an MXF OP1A. And I will shrink it down to the lowest bandwidth possible for DNxHR. That's my preference, but I'm going to leave them as Ultra HD resolution. You can see that that's taking this set of clips from 148 gig down to 15 gig. And the reason I'm doing this is because my hard drives won't be able to keep up with playing the 4 camera angles plus the program record monitor at the same time with such large video files. And you'll see it choke. I'll demonstrate that in a moment. So I want to transcode these down to a much lower bandwidth. I'm going to leave the audio as same as source. And then I will click Start. Now, as it turns out, I've already generated these proxies. And I can find the proxies here. So I'm selecting all these proxy files, and I'm going to drag these into the proxy bin. And we'll see why that's important a bit later on. Okay, so we've got our multicam clip. I'm going to pop over to the edit page. And we'll switch over to our media pool here. And we're going to bring our multicam clip down onto the timeline. And you'll notice that by default, it's starting off with the multicam camera angle 1, as well as the audio for camera angle 1. Now, it turns out that I don't want to use the audio from those cameras. So what I'm going to do, we'll just switch over to the multicam tool here. You'll see we've got multicam understands that there was angle 1, 2, 3, 4, and remember I put the audio, the main audio track on angle 5. I really don't want to use that from the multicam. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to make sure that my linked selection is disabled, turned off, and now I'm going to select just the audio from this multicam clip. And you have to be careful here. My instinct is to hit the delete key, and when I do that, I lose everything. That's not exactly what I wanted to do, so I'm just going to Control Z to undo that. Again, select the audio track and hit the backspace key. So we've removed the audio. And I'm going to go up to my final audio mix, and I'm going to bring it down onto this timeline here. There we go. So there's my final audio mix. And when I'm cutting to the different camera angles, I'm going to click this button here which says just cut the video portion. Ignore the audio. I just want to do a bit more cleanup here. I'm going to step into, so I'm selecting the multicam before I've done any cuts here. And I'm going to open in timeline. We'll just drag this down to bring all our tracks in. And the first thing I'm going to do is I want to remove this audio. So the angle 5, I'm simply going to delete the track, and it removes both the video and audio portion of it, because I really only need the 4 camera angles. The other thing I want to do is I'm going to select all of the clips, and this is very important for using the proxy workflow. I select all the clips inside this multicam, right click, and uncheck the conform lock enabled. This will allow us to actually reconform to a different set of media. So this applies to all the clips now. And now I can step back out for a moment, and I'll demonstrate how sluggish this is. You can see it as I drag through. But if I play it, you can see how jerky the playback is. There's no way that you could cut to that. So what do we do? Well, this is where the proxy workflow comes in. Again, I'm going to step into the open timeline. And this is an important distinction. In earlier versions of Resolve, I think it was at some point in version 14 this changed, but in earlier versions you didn't have to step into the timeline to use the proxy workflow. So here I first open in timeline, and now in my program bin, where I actually have my timeline, I'm going to select my timeline in the media pool here, right click and select reconform from bins. Now, the first thing I want to do is specify which bin is going to hold the new media that I'm going to conform the timeline to. And that will be the proxy bin. So that's where the media exists. Now, it turns out that my time codes for my proxies is identical to the time codes for my source files, and so I actually could conform to source time codes. But I'd have to add additional data because, of course, all the camera angles have the same time codes. So I'm going to turn that off because, in fact, I can use just the file names. Turns out that my proxies have exactly the same file names. Now, that may not have been true. Quite often you'll start off with MP4s, for example, and you may actually change it to MXFs for your proxy media. And so you can use this loose file name match, which will match up just the first part of the name and leave the file extension, ignore the file extension rather. So I'm just using the file name in this case. It's going to look in the proxy bin for matching file names and substitute those into the timeline here. So I'll click OK. Now it's done it very quickly. I'll look at the metadata and we'll select one of the clips, and you can see that it's now the DNxHR LB, not the 444 that it was before. And of course you can right click on it just to find it in the media pool and see that in fact it's found the proxy file. Now I'll just double click down here on timeline 1 to step back out again, and you can see, I'll move this along, it's much more fluid. And as I play it back, you'll see that all 4 angles are playing along with the record monitor in real time, so that you actually could cut to this. So let's do a cut. You can see here under clip that you can do multicam cuts just using your keyboard. So I can tap the keyboards 1, 2, 3, 4 to select angles 1, 2, 3, 4. And I can switch using Alt 1, 2, 3, 4. I actually want to start on Alt 2, so the camera angle 2, with the drummer counting off the intro. You can also switch by simply clicking on the different camera angles. And remember to be in the multicam tool here. If you're just in the source tool, you won't be able to switch angles. So in the multicam tool, and for the sake of this demonstration, I'll actually click on these, but normally I would use the keyboard for switching. So I'm in my starting angle. I'm just going to hit the space bar to start playing. And I'll do a couple of cuts here just to demonstrate this. Okay, I'll pause it there. You could see I can bring it back, and now when I'm playing, as I was clicking on each of these quadrants for my different camera angles, it was placing cuts into our multicam track. I'll just play it back and you'll see the timing of it. I should point out that it's actually playing back the final mix audio, not the audio within the multicam itself. Okay, now before you go to the deliver page, assuming you've done your color grading and everything else, and I'll take a brief look at some aspects of that in a moment, but before you go to your deliver page, you'd want to switch back to your original source media so that you're starting off with the best possible quality media before you then do a transcode to, for example, output to YouTube. So the way you would do that is you'd once again simply right-click on one of the multicam segments here and open up in the timeline, so we're back in. And then right-click on your timeline in the media pool, reconform from bins, and this time we'll select the source bin. And it's remembered that we had the loose file match. So that's the only one we need in this case. So I'll click OK. And now, if we look over at the metadata, you'll see that we're back to the DNxHR444. Right. And again, I can look at Find the Media Pool and see that we're actually now in the source clips here. And I'll just double click here on the timeline one to step back out again, and you can see that we're back to our sluggish behavior. But that's okay. So then you'd switch over to the deliver page, and you could use maybe a YouTube preset for Ultra HD, and you'd browse to a location, go back to my media drive, beside where my source and proxies were. I could create a new folder there called output. Give it a name. I'm not going to upload it directly to YouTube. Set this up. I can also, I'm just going to use the I for endpoint and come down to here and output. So I just want to take a small section of this. So I'm going to be rendering an in and out range here. Now I can add this to the render queue. I still haven't titled my project. I probably should have. And I can start rendering. And it's reasonably fast. Not quite real time, but it kicks it pretty nicely on this machine. I'll just take a look at the performance. It's certainly driving the CPU pretty hard. Okay. I wasn't paying attention when I created the actual output directory, and I ended up specifying output to the media 3 folder and not the actual output folder. My bad. Sometimes these tutorials don't go as planned. That's okay. Play it back here. Okay, so that's the general workflow. There are obviously a few things that need to be refined when you're doing multicam editing, and of course one of them would be, well, the whole color grading and trying to color match the different angles, and then maybe apply some sort of an overall grade, a sort of look and feel to the production. One of the things I noticed here, if we look in this corner, there's actually a dead pixel. Let me zoom in. I'm just using my mouse wheel, and I'll just click and drag with the middle mouse button. There's actually a dead pixel in here. And the way I would clean this up, rather than going to every cut at this level, is I would step into the multicam itself, and from here we can actually go to the effects library and search for dead pixel. So Resolve has a nice dead pixel fixer in it, so I can actually drag this down. I'm inside the multicam clip itself, so I'm just going to drag it onto the affected track. And then I'll use the inspector and the Open Effects tab. Make sure that I'm actually looking at my Open Effects overlay so I can get the tools here. And I can click a position. I'm going to increase the size of this quite a bit. You can see as I'm dragging it around that it basically disappears for the most part. That's okay. And so what that circle's doing is it's basically blending the surrounded areas to basically clone the surrounded areas over top of the dead pixels. So you don't want to make this size too large. Now that's great for this clip, but I now want to copy, and then I'll just select this clip, and then with the control key down I'm going to select the third clip in here, and then I'll right click on these, and I'm going to paste attributes. And the attribute I only want to paste is the plugin attributes at this point. So I'll apply that. So now we've removed the dead pixel from that clip and that clip. We can turn off the dead pixel fixer and see the dead pixel reappear. But the advantage of doing this is that I'm making the change inside the multicam track, and it wouldn't matter then how many times I actually cut this into the program track on the timeline. It will benefit from having the changes simply once to the underlying clip. So every time I cut to this, I'll actually have the correction. The same, if I step back in here, the same is also true if I open up in timeline. If I move over to the color page, I can actually now make color corrections to each one of these clips independently. So I can make some shift. We can make some shift, for example. I'll make a hideous shift here, but just for the sake of demonstration, I'll make a shift to this camera angle, and I can make a completely different shift to this camera angle. And I would simply go along, and for other similar camera angles, I'll simply match up the other instances. Remember, for most of those cameras, there were actually three separate clips, except for camera 3, there were only 2. But I can, for example, select the second instance of camera 2, and then with my middle mouse button, I'm just clicking on this clip just to copy the grade. Similarly for this guy here, this was camera 3. It's this guy. This one. Here's 2 again. Camera 4. And camera 1. So I've copied the grades across. We'll go back over to the edit page. So this is where all the grades are coming through. And now I'm going to step back out And we'll just fit this. So you can see that we're actually seeing the grades now from the color grading that went on inside the multicam. And even down here, if I were to switch over, make sure I'm in multicam mode. Right, so I can switch over to Alt-2. You can see it has the color grade applied. So Alt-1, Alt-2, Alt-3, for which there's no video at that point, and Alt-4. So you can see how it's benefiting from those color grades. Interestingly enough, when you're actually working at this level, if you switch now over to the color page, you'll notice that none of these actually have color grades applied to them as far as the multicam level of the program is concerned. So at this point, once you've color matched your different angles, by stepping into the multicam clip, you can come back to this and apply whatever treatment you want to give it a sort of overall grade. So as hideous as this is, that kind of gives you the idea of how color is different inside the multicam clip. Let's step back in again. Inside the multicam clip, we have our grades. You can tell because each of these has a little sort of colorful box above it. So each one of these clips has a grade applied. And as we saw, the fourth camera angle actually has the open effects applied across it. Step back out again. And you can see, even though this has the dead pixel fixer on it, at the level of multicam on the program timeline, there's no sense of a OFX effect applied. Okay, so that's a bit of rambling there. I'm going to cut it at this point. Hopefully that gave you not only an appreciation for how you go about using the proxy workflow with multicam in Resolve 16, but also some details about creating the proxy files and synchronizing, creating your multicam clip and out for final delivery. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.